Welcome, adventurers, to a journey like no other. Today, we're diving into one of the greatest stories in Greek mythology, the tale of Heracles, known as Hercules in Roman mythology. Get ready to explore his incredible 12 labors, a series of challenges so intense that they push the limits of what any mortal could endure, and maybe even a god. Heracles wasn't just any man. He was the son of Zeus, king of the gods, and Alcmene, a mortal woman. Born with unimaginable strength, he was also cursed by Hera, Zeus' wife, who was insanely jealous of him. From the moment he was born, Heracles' fate was sealed. He was destined for greatness, but it would come at a great cost. So why did Heracles have to undertake these 12 labors? Why would such a powerful hero need to prove himself? Well, it all began with an unintentional crime. After a series of tragic events, Heracles was cursed and commanded to perform these labors as a way to atone for his past mistakes. It's a journey of redemption, of proving his worth to the gods and even to himself. But these tasks weren't easy. They were brutal, testing not just his strength, but his wits and courage. And trust me, they only get harder as we go along. In this video, we'll break down each of these incredible labors. We'll see how Heracles faced down terrifying monsters, outsmarted tricky enemies, and overcame the impossible. It's not just about strength. It's about pushing through adversity and growing into a true hero. So, as we follow Heracles through these challenges, ask yourself, could you face these trials? Before we dive in, make sure you hit that like button if you're excited to join the adventure with us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on future mythological journeys. Join the quest, because today we're going to uncover the secrets behind Heracles' labors and explore the legacy of this legendary hero. So, are you ready? Grab your gear and let's dive into the first labor, where we meet a beast so fierce that no weapon can harm it. Let's see how Heracles faces the Nemean Lion. The first of Heracles' 12 labors is a feat that would strike fear into the heart of any warrior. It is the story of how Heracles was tasked with slaying the Nemean Lion, an immortal creature whose strength and ferocity were beyond anything mortal men could face. The Nemean Lion was no ordinary beast, and its very existence was a terrifying challenge for even the mightiest heroes. The Nemean Lion was a creature of legend dwelling in the region of Nemea, a place located in the northeastern part of the Peloponnesian Peninsula in ancient Greece. The lion was not just any large predator. It was gigantic, its body massive and its mane golden and thick like a cloak of impenetrable armor. This lion was so powerful that it could easily overpower the largest of wild beasts, and its strength was the stuff of nightmares. But what made the Nemean lion truly deadly was its near invincibility. It was said that no weapon, neither sword, nor spear, nor arrow, could pierce its hide. Any weapon that struck its thick fur would simply bounce off, as if the lion's skin were made of steel. It was an utterly indestructible force of nature. To make matters worse, this lion wasn't just a mindless beast. It was a cunning and ruthless predator, capable of attacking with brutal force and hunting in the shadows. Its roar alone was enough to send shivers down the spines of even the bravest warriors, echoing across the land as a warning to anyone foolish enough to venture into its territory. For years, the people of Nemea had lived in terror of the lion, unable to defeat it. The beast had killed countless heroes and warriors who had dared to challenge it. Its reign of terror seemed unending, and it was said that the people of Nemea had offered sacrifices to the gods in hopes of ridding themselves of this menace, but to no avail. When King Eurystheus of Tiryns, the man who would be Heracles' ultimate taskmaster, gave Heracles this first labor, it was not just a test of his strength, but a trial that would demand everything from him. Heracles, the son of Zeus, was no stranger to challenges, but even he understood the gravity of what he was about to face. To defeat the Nemean Lion would require not only extraordinary might, but ingenuity. And thus began the first of Heracles' 12 labors. Heracles began his quest by traveling to Nemea, determined to rid the region of the terror that had plagued it for so long. As he entered the lion's territory, he encountered the full extent of the creature's power. The ground seemed to tremble beneath him with every step, as if the lion's presence alone could shake the earth. The air was thick with the stench of the beast, and the silence was unnerving. There were no birds chirping, no wind rustling the trees. Only the looming sense that the lion was watching him, stalking him from the shadows. Heracles could feel the weight of the challenge hanging over him. For days, Heracles searched for the lion, carefully navigating the rough, wild terrain of Nemea. Eventually, he found the lion's lair, a dark cave nestled in the side of a mountain where the beast took refuge. As Heracles approached, he knew that he was about to face a foe unlike any other. With the first step into the cave, the lion emerged, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly fire. The battle was about to begin. In an instant, the lion lunged at Heracles with blinding speed. Its jaws were wide fangs sharp enough to tear through bone, and its claws were like daggers capable of ripping through flesh. Heracles, however, was ready. He leaped to the side just in time to avoid the lion's first attack. He swung his club, aiming for the beast's skull, but the blow barely fazed the lion. It was like hitting a stone. The lion growled its voice, rumbling like thunder, and Heracles knew that normal weapons would not suffice. The lion's invulnerable skin rendered his sword and club useless. Now, Heracles would have to rely on his greatest weapon, his immense strength and unmatched determination. He remembered the advice of his mentor Chiron the centaur, who had once told him, "It is not always the weapon that wins a battle, but the will of the one who wields it." With this wisdom in mind, Heracles decided to engage the lion in close combat, knowing that only by using his hands and raw power could he defeat the beast. Heracles waited for the lion to make its next move. As the lion lunged toward him again, Heracles dodged and grabbed the beast by the neck. With a surge of strength, he wrapped his powerful arms around the lion's throat, using his sheer force to choke the life out of it. The lion struggled, thrashing and roaring, but Heracles' grip was like iron. For hours, the battle raged on with Heracles clinging to the lion, refusing to let go. The two fought like forces of nature, one struggling for survival, the other fighting for dominance. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Heracles' immense strength began to take its toll on the mighty lion. With one final twist of his arms, Heracles strangled the beast, bringing it to the ground. The Nemean Lion, one of the most fearsome creatures to ever walk the earth, was dead, but the task was far from over. Although the lion was slain, Heracles had to find a way to prove his victory. Since no weapon could pierce the lion's hide, he had to use the lion's own fur to demonstrate his triumph. Heracles skinned the lion with his bare hands, using the creature's claws as a tool. The skin of the Nemean lion was incredibly thick and nearly impenetrable, and it took all of Heracles' skill and strength to remove it. Once the task was complete, Heracles wore the lion's skin as a cloak, which not only served as a powerful armor, but also symbolized his victory over the beast. The skin, impervious to any weapon, would protect him throughout the rest of his labors. When Heracles returned to King Eurystheus, he proudly displayed the Nemean Lion's pelt, a symbol of his victory. But instead of being impressed, Eurystheus was terrified. He had expected Heracles to fail, but now the hero stood before him, wearing the pelt of the most fearsome creature in the world. The king was so frightened by the sight that he ordered Heracles to perform the next labor, immediately hoping to get rid of him once and for all. The slaying of the Nemean lion was not just a display of strength, it was the beginning of Heracles' journey to redemption. This first labor was a victory that set the tone for the rest of his challenges, an early reminder that though he faced impossible odds, Heracles would rise to every challenge and conquer the seemingly unconquerable. Heracles' triumph over the Nemean lion is a story of courage, ingenuity, and raw strength. The lion, once thought to be invincible, was no match for Heracles' perseverance. This first labor marked the beginning of a legend, a hero who would go on to face even greater challenges and become one of the most celebrated figures in Greek mythology. But before Heracles could rest on his victory, more trials awaited him, each more daunting than the last, as he moved forward, wearing the pelt of the Nemean lion. As both protection and symbol of his strength, the path ahead would test him in ways he could never have imagined. In the second of Heracles' 12 labors, he was tasked with slaying the Lernaean Hydra, one of the most terrifying and deadly creatures in Greek mythology. The Hydra was not just a simple monster, it was a multi-headed serpent-like beast whose very existence seemed designed to test the limits of any hero's courage and strength. The Hydra dwelled in the swamps near the Lake of Lerna, a dark and treacherous area that was said to be cursed. The creature's lair was known for its fetid air, poisonous waters, and the eerie sounds that echoed through the swamp, making it a place no one dared to venture. The Hydra was a creature of unimaginable terror. Its body was that of a serpent, long and sinuous, covered in dark, scaly skin. It had many heads, some say as few as 5, others claim as many as 9, or even more. Each head was topped with a pair of glowing eyes, fierce and merciless. But the most dangerous aspect of the Hydra was not its sheer size or strength, but the deadly breath it emitted from its mouths. The Hydra's breath was poisonous enough to kill any living creature that inhaled it. Furthermore, each of the Hydra's heads had the ability to regenerate. For every head that was cut off, 2 more would grow back in its place, making it nearly impossible to defeat by conventional means. But the Hydra's most fearsome trait was its venomous nature. It was said that the beast's blood was so toxic that just a drop of it could kill a man. This venom coursed through its many heads, making each strike of its fangs more lethal than the last. Even the bravest warriors who had attempted to slay the Hydra before Heracles had failed, often succumbing to the poison or being overwhelmed by the creature's regenerating heads. The Hydra was a force of nature, a symbol of chaos and death, and no one had ever been able to defeat it. This was the challenge Heracles now faced, a battle against a creature that could heal itself with each blow dealt. Heracles arrived at the swamp of Lerna, prepared for what he knew would be another difficult trial, but nothing could have prepared him for the Hydra's monstrous power. The challenge was immediate. He found the Hydra coiled around the swamp's murky waters, its many heads darting in and out of the water, each one snapping at the air as if sensing his presence. At first, Heracles tried to approach the Hydra, with his sword sashing at the creature's heads with powerful strikes. He quickly learned, however, that this would not be enough. The Hydra was relentless, and every time one of its heads was severed, two more would grow in its place, multiplying the threat exponentially. Each new head emerged with a hiss, eager to strike at Heracles. The more heads he cut off, the more dangerous the Hydra became. The first few strikes were met with brief satisfaction as Heracles severed a head, only to see two more sprout in its place. He tried to battle on, but the situation quickly became dire. Heracles realized that conventional methods would not work. Simply cutting off the heads would only make the Hydra stronger, not weaker. To defeat this creature, he would need a new strategy, one that involved not only strength, but also careful precision and ingenuity. At this point, Heracles called upon his cousin Iolaus, who had accompanied him on his journey. Iolaus was a brave and resourceful young man, and his role in this particular labor would prove essential. Heracles, after cutting off a head, would call for Iolaus, who had the quick thinking to help him deal with the regenerating heads. Iolaus had brought with him a burning brand, a torch or a fire, something that Heracles hadn't initially thought to use. As soon as a head was severed, Iolaus would use the flame to cauterize the wound, preventing the regeneration of the Hydra's head. This technique was the key to Heracles' victory, as it stopped the creature from becoming even more overwhelming as the battle progressed. But this was no easy task. As Heracles battled the Hydra, he found himself struggling not only against the creature's incredible strength and speed, but also its venomous breath. Each time the Hydra attacked, Heracles had to avoid its deadly fangs, which dripped with poison. One bite from the Hydra could be enough to kill a lesser man. However, Heracles was no ordinary man. He fought with relentless focus, cutting off head after head, while Iolaus swiftly sealed each wound with fire. The Hydra's ability to regenerate its heads was the key difficulty of this labor, and for a long while, Heracles seemed to be locked in a never-ending battle. For every head he severed, two more grew back in its place, causing the situation to become increasingly more dire. The Hydra was no ordinary beast, and Heracles soon realized that he was facing not only a physical challenge, but a battle of wits. The creature's regenerative power made the usual methods of combat useless, and Heracles needed to adapt if he was to have any chance of success. In the heat of the battle, Heracles began to understand the true nature of his opponent. The Hydra was not just a monster. It was a creature of chaos, a being of destruction that fed on death and decay. The more heads that grew back, the more dangerous the Hydra became. But Heracles did not give up. He fought with even greater determination, pushing through the pain and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. He and Iolaus worked in tandem, Heracles battling the Hydra, and Iolaus providing the necessary fire to seal each wound. The key moment in the battle came when Heracles, using his immense strength and perseverance, severed the Hydra's final head. This head, unlike the others, was immortal. It could not be killed by normal means, and Heracles knew that he would have to deal with it in a special way. With his great strength, he crushed the immortal head beneath his foot, rendering it powerless. But the fight was far from over. As Heracles continued to battle the Hydra, he realized that its blood was more deadly than he had ever imagined. The Hydra's venomous blood began to spill into the water, and Heracles realized that he had to take care to avoid contact with it. In a final move of brilliance, Heracles dipped his arrows into the poisonous blood of the Hydra, creating weapons that would later help him in subsequent labors. These poisoned arrows would become one of his most dangerous tools in the coming trials. Finally, after a long and grueling battle, Heracles emerged victorious. The Hydra lay dead, its many heads severed, and its poisonous blood rendered useless. But this victory was not just a triumph of strength, it was also a testament to Heracles' resourcefulness and determination. He had faced one of the most difficult and terrifying creatures in all of mythology, and had overcome it through a combination of sheer force, careful planning, and the help of his cousin, Iolaus. Heracles' victory over the Hydra was a pivotal moment in his journey, for it showed that brute strength alone would not always be enough to win. He had to think, adapt, and work with others to overcome the Hydra's regenerative power. The poisoned arrows, which would play a key role in his future labors, symbolized the lasting impact of his victory and the lessons he learned from it. Heracles' defeat of the Lernaean Hydra is one of the most iconic moments in Greek mythology, not just for the sheer difficulty of the task, but for the cleverness and strategy that it required. In facing a creature capable of endless regeneration, Heracles learned that strength alone would not carry him through every challenge. He had to adapt, think on his feet, and most importantly, rely on the help of his companion, Iolaus. Through teamwork, fire, and persistence, Heracles managed to overcome one of the most formidable beasts in all of mythology. The Hydra's defeat cemented Heracles' reputation as a hero who could not only conquer impossible odds, but also think critically and solve problems in creative ways. But even with the Hydra slain, the labors were far from over. More challenges awaited him, each greater than the last. Yet, with each victory, Heracles proved that no matter the monster, no matter the obstacle, he would rise to the occasion. The third of Heracles' 12 labors was perhaps one of the most challenging, not because of brute strength or fierce combat, but because it required a delicate balance of skill, patience, and perseverance. Heracles was tasked with capturing the Cernaean hind, a magnificent and elusive creature known for its incredible speed and agility. This deer was no ordinary animal. It was a divine creature, sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and it roamed the forests of Cyrenea, located in the region of Arcadia. The Cernaean hind was renowned for its beauty and grace. It had golden antlers that sparkled in the sunlight, and its hooves were as swift as the wind. Its agility was legendary, and it could outrun even the fastest of predators. The hind's speed was so extraordinary that it could outrun arrows fired by the most skilled archers, making it nearly impossible to catch. But the challenge Heracles faced was not only to catch the deer, but to do so without causing it harm. The task was made even more complicated by the fact that the hind was under Artemis's protection, meaning that any harm done to the animal would anger the goddess, potentially causing dire consequences for Heracles. Heracles' task, then, was clear: capture the Cernaean hind alive and bring it back to King Eurystheus without killing or wounding it. This would prove to be a difficult endeavor, one that would test not only his physical strength, but his skill as a hunter and his ability to think carefully under pressure. Unlike the previous labors, which required brute force and combat, this labor demanded subtlety, strategy, and an incredible amount of patience. The challenge Heracles faced in capturing the Cernaean hind was rooted in the nature of the creature itself. The hind was not just fast, it was supernatural in its speed. According to the myth, the deer could run faster than the eye could follow, making it nearly impossible to catch using conventional methods. Heracles knew that capturing it by force would only end in failure, as the hind would simply evade him with its lightning speed. It would be a battle of endurance, and Heracles needed to outwit the creature rather than overpower it. The other major obstacle was the animal's sacred status. The Cernaean hind was a favorite of Artemis, and the goddess took great care to protect it. Artemis herself was a skilled hunter, known for her own agility and precision, and any harm done to the deer would incur her wrath. Heracles, knowing this, had to be extremely careful in his approach. He couldn't kill or even injure the hind, or risk angering the goddess and invoking her vengeance. This added an extra layer of difficulty to the task. Heracles had to exercise restraint, capturing the creature with gentleness, rather than using the usual force and aggression that characterized many of his other labors. Heracles began his pursuit of the Cernaean hind with patience and strategy. The deer's incredible speed meant that there was no hope of catching it in a direct chase. So Heracles took a more measured approach, tracking the hind through the forests of Cernaea, studying its habits and movements. He learned the paths it took and the places it frequented, slowly closing in on his prey. The task was not as simple as just chasing the deer down. Heracles had to anticipate its movements and predict where it would go next. For many months, Heracles pursued the hind across vast stretches of land. The chase was long and grueling, as the hind led him through dense forests, over rivers, and across rugged mountains. Each time Heracles thought he was close to capturing it, the deer would disappear into the shadows, vanishing from sight with its incredible speed. Heracles was determined, however, and he refused to give up. He knew that patience would be key, and that he had to wait for the perfect opportunity to strike. The pursuit took Heracles deep into the wilderness, where he encountered all manner of challenges. He had to navigate treacherous terrain, avoid dangerous wildlife, and find food and water in the wilds. But with each passing day, Heracles grew more and more accustomed to the terrain, and his determination to capture the hind never wavered. The chase was not just a physical test, it was a mental one as well. Heracles had to keep his wits sharp, always staying one step behind the elusive deer, never allowing it to get too far out of reach. As the months wore on, Heracles began to feel the weight of the task. The longer the chase continued, the harder it became to stay focused. His body grew tired, but his resolve never faltered. Finally, after nearly a year of pursuit, Heracles managed to track the Cernaean hind into a remote part of the forest, a place where the animal often stopped to rest. He had studied Hind's movements so thoroughly that he knew exactly where it would go. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Heracles had now cornered the Cernaean hind. The deer, exhausted from the long chase, was finally within his reach. Heracles knew that this would be the moment that determined the success or failure of the task. The hind was still fast, but it had slowed down, perhaps out of sheer exhaustion. Heracles moved carefully, not wanting to startle the creature, and he approached it slowly, inching closer and closer. Using all the skills he had learned during the long chase, Heracles finally managed to get close enough to catch the hind. He didn't rely on force to overpower the animal, as that would have been too dangerous. Instead, he used his dexterity and his understanding of the creature's behavior. Heracles approached from behind, gently reaching out and catching the deer by its antlers. The hind, still wary, but now too tired to flee, struggled briefly before Heracles was able to secure it in his grasp. Despite its incredible speed, the Ceryneian hind was no match for Heracles' determination. After a year-long chase, the hero had finally succeeded in capturing the creature alive. He had fulfilled the task without harming it, a testament to his patience and skill. The capture was not a brutal victory, but a triumph of endurance and careful planning. The deer, still trembling in Heracles' grasp, had been caught not by violence, but by the hunter's perseverance. After capturing the Ceryneian hind, Heracles faced another challenge, returning the deer to King Eurystheus. Heracles had been warned that any harm done to the hind would incur the wrath of Artemis, and so he had to transport the creature with the utmost care. The journey back was a delicate one, as Heracles had to ensure the hind remained unharmed while still completing his task. Heracles took every precaution, traveling carefully and avoiding any actions that might upset the sacred animal. When Heracles finally arrived at the court of King Eurystheus, he presented the Ceryneian hind as proof of his victory. Eurystheus, however, was not impressed. He was terrified of Heracles' growing success and the strength of the hero's resolve. The king, instead of praising Heracles for his skill and patience, was horrified by the sight of the living deer, knowing that Artemis might be angered. He ordered Heracles to release the hind immediately, fearing the wrath of the goddess. Heracles, respecting the goddess's protection over the hind, released the creature back into the wild, and it disappeared into the forests of Cerynea. The hunt for the Ceryneian hind was complete, and Heracles had proven once again that his strength was not just in his physical power, but in his ability to think carefully and endure. The capture of the Ceryneian hind marked a turning point in Heracles' labors. Unlike the previous tasks that had required brute strength and fierce combat, this labor demanded patience, precision, and careful planning. Heracles' ability to track and outlast the hind for a year showed that he was not only a hero of physical prowess, but one of great endurance and skill. He had learned that sometimes the greatest challenges come not from fighting monsters, but from mastering the art of patience and strategy. Heracles' triumph over the Ceryneian hind was not just about capturing a deer. It was a testament to his unwavering resolve and his ability to adapt to the demands of each labor. As he continued on his journey, he would face even greater challenges. But his success in this task would serve as a reminder that sometimes the most difficult battles are the ones fought not with strength, but with perseverance and wisdom. The fourth of Heracles' 12 labors was one of raw physicality, a labor that would demand both strength and cunning. Heracles was tasked with capturing the Erymanthian boar, a giant monstrous wild boar that was terrorizing the region of Erymanthos in Arcadia. This boar, far larger and more dangerous than any normal wild boar, had become a menace to the local population, ravaging fields, forests, and farmland with its massive size and uncontrollable rage. The Erymanthian boar was a creature of legend, terrifying not only for its size, but for its sheer ferocity. The boar's tusks were as long as swords, capable of slicing through trees and rock. Its hooves, hardened from constant movement across the rough terrain, could cause deep gouges in the earth. But it wasn't just its size and power that made the boar so dangerous. It was also its temperament. The boar was wild and unpredictable, attacking anyone who came too close. It had become a terror to the people of Erymanthos, destroying crops and causing widespread panic. In Greek mythology, the Erymanthian boar was said to be a creature of great strength, almost a force of nature. It was often associated with the gods, who used it as a test for Heracles. The boar's destruction was not only a threat to the people of Arcadia, but also to the land itself, as its rampages devastated the forests and made it nearly impossible for farmers and hunters to go about their work. The creature was said to have been so vicious that it became an object of fear in the entire region. King Eurystheus, always seeking to humiliate Heracles and force him into difficult tasks, commanded the hero to capture this beast alive and bring it back to him. The task was made even more daunting by the fact that the boar was not simply going to surrender. Heracles would have to use his wit and stamina to outlast the boar's destructive power. Upon receiving the task from King Eurystheus, Heracles knew that capturing the Erymanthian boar would not be like his previous labors. While strength would certainly play a role, this challenge would require careful planning and a strategic approach. Heracles could not simply approach the boar head-on and hope to overpower it. He had to find a way to corner and subdue the animal without killing it. Something that was much easier said than done when dealing with a creature so wild and untamed. The first step in Heracles' plan was to travel to the region of Erymanthos, a remote and rugged part of Arcadia. It was a harsh and mountainous terrain, home to thick forests, steep cliffs, and rocky ravines. The boar had taken refuge deep in the wilderness, and it was clear that finding it would be no easy task. Heracles, however, was undeterred. He knew that his years of experience as a hunter would serve him well in this endeavor. As he traveled through the land, Heracles gathered the necessary tools for the hunt. He carried with him his trusted bow and arrows, as well as a large net that he planned to use to trap the boar once he had cornered it. However, Heracles understood that capturing the boar would require more than just weapons. He would need to track the animal carefully, understand its movements, and plan his attack accordingly. Heracles began by following the trail of destruction left in the wake of the boar's rampages. Broken trees, trampled fields, and the scattered remnants of crops marked the creature's path. It wasn't long before Heracles found signs of the boar's movements, deep gouges in the earth, broken branches, and large, distinct footprints. He knew he was getting closer. The key to capturing the boar alive was to not only track it, but also to predict where it would go next. He had to anticipate the creature's movements and find a way to ensnare it before it could escape. As Heracles journeyed deeper into the forest, he soon found himself face to face with the Erymanthian boar. The creature was a sight to behold, a massive beast with long, sharp tusks that gleamed in the sunlight. Its body was covered in thick, bristly fur, and its eyes burned with a fierce, wild rage. When the boar saw Heracles, it let out an earth-shaking roar, bellowing in defiance. The animal charged its hooves, pounding the ground with thunderous force. Heracles was prepared for this confrontation. As the boar charged toward him, he nimbly dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's tusks. The boar's strength and speed were overwhelming, but Heracles was faster, using his agility and hunting skills to stay just out of the boar's reach. The chase began in earnest, with the boar running through the dense forest, causing massive destruction in its wake, while Heracles pursued it tirelessly. The boar was no easy quarry. It was fast, strong, and incredibly aggressive, and it seemed to know the terrain better than Heracles did. Each time Heracles thought he had it cornered, The boar would break free, running even deeper into the wilderness. The pursuit lasted for hours, then days, as Heracles tracked the boar through the rough and unforgiving landscape of Arcadia. The forest itself seemed to be working against him as trees and rocks blocked his path, and the boar's rage caused more and more damage to the environment. Heracles, however, was relentless. He knew that he couldn't let up. He had to capture the boar alive. He continued to follow the creature through the forest using his immense stamina and endurance to keep up with it. Finally, after several days of exhausting pursuit, Heracles managed to corner the boar in a dense thicket near the top of Mount Erymanthos, a towering peak that rose above the surrounding land. Now that Heracles had cornered the Erymanthian boar, the real challenge began. The creature was exhausted from the long chase, but its ferocity had not diminished. It was still capable of launching a brutal attack, and Heracles knew that he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The boar's tusks were like sharp blades, and one wrong move could spell disaster. Heracles had to think quickly. Rather than trying to overpower the boar with brute strength, he decided to use his wit. He began by creating a trap, a large net that he had brought with him for just this purpose. The trap would need to be set just right. The boar had to be lured into it without realizing it was there. Heracles used the terrain to his advantage, positioning the net in a narrow part of the forest where the boar was likely to charge through. With the trap in place, Heracles carefully baited the boar by creating a path that would lead it directly toward the net. Heracles then waited, knowing that patience would be key. As the boar neared, he stood motionless, careful not to alert the creature to his presence. The boar, sensing no immediate threat, charged through the trees, and as it ran into the net, Heracles swiftly pulled the ropes, ensnaring the creature. The Erymanthian boar struggled fiercely, but the trap held firm. Heracles had successfully captured the creature alive, and with great effort he subdued it, tying it securely so that it could not escape. The boar, though still furious, had been defeated without a single injury to its body. Heracles' careful planning and precise execution had ensured that the task was completed successfully. With the Erymanthian boar captured, Heracles began his journey back to the court of King Eurystheus. The boar, still alive but exhausted, was dragged along by Heracles, who had to take extra precautions to keep it from escaping. The journey was long and difficult, as Heracles had to navigate back through the treacherous forests and mountains of Arcadia. When Heracles finally returned to King Eurystheus, the king was horrified by the sight of the giant boar, which had been subdued without harm. Eurystheus, who was terrified of the hero's growing success, ordered that the boar be released immediately. Heracles, knowing that the king was fearful of the boar's power, complied, letting the creature go free once more. The Erymanthian boar was released back into the wild, where it could continue its rampages. But Heracles had proven his ability to capture the beast without resorting to violence. This labor, though less glamorous than some of his other feats, demonstrated Heracles' tactical mind as he relied not only on strength, but on his ability to think through challenges and use the environment to his advantage. The capture of the Erymanthian boar was another triumph in Heracles' long series of labors. While the task required brute strength, it also showcased his intelligence and tactical skill. The boar, a force of nature in its own right, was no match for Heracles' perseverance and cunning. This labor served as a reminder that true heroism is not just about raw power, but about using all of one's resources, physical and mental, to overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Heracles had now completed 4 labors, each more difficult than the last, but his journey was far from over. The king's fear of the hero only grew with each success, and more dangerous and complex tasks awaited him. But Heracles had already shown that no matter the challenge, he would find a way to succeed. The fifth of Heracles' 12 labors was one of the most daunting and at first glance almost impossible tasks he had ever been set. Heracles was commanded to clean the Augean stables, a massive and filthy complex that housed the royal herds of King Augeas of Elis. The stables were legendary, not for their size or grandeur, but for the appalling filth that filled them. Augeas, the king of Elis, was a wealthy ruler who owned an enormous herd of cattle. Over the years, however, he had neglected the upkeep of his stables. The sheer number of cattle that were kept in the stables, combined with the lack of proper cleaning and care, had led to an overwhelming accumulation of manure waste and filth. The stables had not been cleaned in years, and they had become a veritable cesspool. The stench was unbearable, and the muck piled so high that it was nearly impossible to navigate the area. The filth had become a monument to Augeas' laziness, a place that no one dared to go near. King Augeas, however, had promised a reward to anyone who could clean the stables in a single day. He was confident that no one could possibly complete such a monumental task, and thus he issued the challenge with little expectation that it would ever be fulfilled. Little did he know that Heracles, the son of Zeus, would take up the task and succeed where no one else had even dared to try. Heracles' task was clean the Augean stables in one day. The sheer magnitude of the task made it seem nearly impossible. The stables were enormous, and there were thousands of cattle whose waste had accumulated over years. Simply shoveling the manure away by hand would take an eternity, and Heracles knew that brute force alone would not suffice. He would need to come up with a clever solution if he was to accomplish this labor in the time allotted. At first, the task seemed insurmountable. The Augean stables were vast, and the filth inside them was so deep that it would have taken an entire army of workers months, if not years, to clean it. Yet Heracles was not the kind of hero to back down from a challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. He quickly realized that cleaning the stables through traditional methods would never work. Instead, he needed to think outside the box. He needed to find a way to clean the stables efficiently, using his strength and ingenuity. Heracles, drawing on his experience and knowledge of the land, came up with a brilliant plan. Rather than attempting to scoop out the filth by hand, he decided to reroute 2 nearby rivers, specifically the Alpheus and Peneus rivers, into the stables. By diverting the river's water into the stables, Heracles could flood the area and wash away the manure in a matter of hours. The powerful current from the rivers would carry the filth away, cleaning the stables in a fraction of the time it would take to remove the waste manually. Heracles immediately set to work gathering the necessary tools and resources to make his plan a reality. He began by diverting the course of the Alpheus and Peneus rivers, using his strength and ingenuity to create channels that would lead the water directly into the Augean stables. The task was not easy. Redirecting 2 powerful rivers required careful planning and great physical effort, but Heracles was up to the challenge. He had faced impossible odds before, and this task would be no different. The rivers, once redirected, began to flow into the stables, quickly filling the area with rushing water. The force of the water swept through the stables, pushing the filth and manure out of the buildings and into the surrounding fields. The water rushed through the corridors and stalls, cleaning the floors and washing away the years of accumulated waste in a matter of hours. The process was swift, efficient, and completely transformative. Where once there was an overwhelming stench of filth, now there was the refreshing sound of rushing water. Within a single day, the Augean stables were completely cleaned, and Heracles had accomplished the seemingly impossible. When Heracles completed the task, he stood back and admired his work. The Augean stables, once a stinking pit of filth, were now spotless and clean. The ground was clear, the air was fresh, and the cattle could once again live in a healthy and clean environment. It was a monumental achievement, one that Heracles had completed in a single day as he had promised. But when Heracles returned to King Augeas to claim his reward, the king was not as impressed as one might expect. Augeas, like many others before him, had underestimated Heracles' abilities. While he had promised to reward anyone who could clean the stables, he did not believe that such a task could be accomplished. Now faced with the reality that Heracles had indeed completed the labor, the king refused to honor his promise. He claimed that Heracles had used trickery to clean the stables, as he had relied on the rivers rather than manual labor. He argued that Heracles had not truly completed the task as it was meant to be done, and thus he refused to give the hero the reward. Heracles, however, was undeterred. He had completed the task according to the letter of the challenge, and his creative solution had shown that true heroism lay not only in strength, but also in ingenuity. Heracles' actions proved that sometimes the greatest challenges require thinking beyond traditional methods and using every tool at one's disposal to achieve success. Although King Augeas refused to give him the reward, Heracles had made his point. No task was impossible for a hero who was willing to think outside the box. While Heracles was not rewarded for his success in cleaning the Augean stables, the labor itself was a pivotal moment in his journey. It demonstrated that Heracles was not just a man of brute strength. He was also a master of problem-solving and creativity. This labor required more than just physical power. It required quick thinking strategy and an understanding of the natural world. Heracles' ability to redirect the rivers showcased his resourcefulness, and his success in completing the task within a single day was a testament to his determination and ingenuity. The cleaning of the Augean stables also highlighted the theme of redemption that runs throughout Heracles' 12 labors. Just as he was tasked with cleaning a filthy and neglected space, Heracles was also seeking to cleanse himself of the sins and mistakes of his past. This labor was a symbolic cleansing away for Heracles to demonstrate his ability to overcome even the most overwhelming challenges through strength, intellect, and perseverance. The labor also serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come from thinking creatively and approaching problems from a different angle. Heracles' solution to the Augean stables problem was not the most traditional, but it was the most effective. By using the natural resources around him and thinking strategically, he was able to accomplish what seemed impossible. And in doing so, he proved that heroism was not just about fighting and defeating enemies, but also about solving problems in ways no one else had thought of before. The fifth labor of Heracles, cleaning the Augean stables, was a labor that tested not only his physical strength, but his ability to think outside the box. While the task appeared impossible at first, Heracles' quick thinking and ingenuity allowed him to accomplish it in a single day. His use of the Alpheus and Peneus rivers to wash away the filth was a stroke of brilliance, showcasing his resourcefulness and problem-solving skills. Though he was not rewarded by King Augeas, Heracles proved once again that no challenge was too great for him to overcome. This labor, like all the others, solidified Heracles' reputation as one of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology, a man who could conquer any obstacle, whether through strength, creativity, or sheer determination. As Heracles moved on to his next labor, the cleaning of the Augean stables remained a powerful symbol of his ability to face the impossible head-on and to succeed where others had failed. The sixth of Heracles' 12 labors is one of the most peculiar and dangerous tasks he was set to complete. This time, Heracles was tasked with slaying the Stymphalian birds, a terrifying flock of creatures that plagued the Stymphalian marshes in northern Arcadia. The Stymphalian birds were no ordinary birds. These deadly creatures were known for their razor-sharp metal feathers, which they could launch like arrows at anyone who ventured too close. The birds' beaks were like iron, capable of slicing through flesh, and their talons were equally lethal. But it wasn't just their weaponized feathers that made them such a threat. The flock was incredibly large, and their collective power was enough to terrorize the surrounding region, making it nearly impossible for anyone to live in peace. According to the myth, the Stymphalian birds had been sent by the goddess Hera to cause havoc in the region. These creatures were part of her cruel schemes meant to create suffering for anyone who crossed their path. They had become a menace, nesting in the dense marshes and swamps, their numbers growing steadily. The birds were vicious, attacking farmers, hunters, and travelers, and anyone who tried to approach them met a deadly end. The local population had long since given up trying to fight the birds, as they could not get close without being hit by the birds' deadly metal feathers. As always, King Eurystheus had set this task for Heracles to test his ability and to make him prove that he was capable of dealing with such a formidable foe. But slaying the Stymphalian birds was not going to be easy. With their ability to attack from the air and their dangerous metal feathers, Heracles would need more than just strength to defeat them. He would have to rely on cleverness and strategy to take down the flock. Heracles' first challenge in confronting the Stymphalian birds was getting them to appear in the first place. The birds were known to stay hidden deep within the marshes, making it nearly impossible to see them unless they were provoked. The key, therefore, was to draw the birds out of their hiding places where they could be attacked. But brute force would not work in this situation. Heracles had to find a way to make the birds come to him. This was where Heracles' resourcefulness came into play. The god Hephaestus, known for his skill in crafting powerful and magical items, had provided Heracles with a special tool, a bronze rattle. The rattle was no ordinary instrument. It was loud and made a sound so powerful that it could easily attract the attention of the birds. When Heracles shook the rattle, it made a noise that echoed across the marshes, disturbing the stillness and forcing the birds to take flight. The rattle's clattering sound served as a signal calling the birds into the open where they would be vulnerable. Heracles shook the rattle with all his might, the sound echoing through the swamp. As the birds heard the noise, they began to stir in their nests, rising from the ground and taking flight. The birds' flight was swift and coordinated, and soon the sky was filled with the deadly flock, each bird armed with its sharp metal feathers. The birds were now in the air, circling above Heracles, ready to attack. They swooped down, launching their razor-sharp feathers toward him with deadly accuracy. Heracles had to act quickly before the birds descended upon him in full force. With the birds now in the air, Heracles needed to deal with them swiftly and decisively. The Stymphalian birds were quick and agile, and their feathers could cause deadly wounds. Heracles knew he would have to find a way to counter the birds' aerial advantage while avoiding their attacks. Heracles drew his bow and began shooting arrows at the birds. However, these birds were not easily killed by normal arrows. Their metal feathers could easily deflect the arrows, and their speed made them hard targets. So Heracles realized that he would need something more powerful than his standard arrows to take them down. Once again, he was able to rely on a gift from the gods. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare, provided Heracles with a magical set of arrows tipped with the poison of the Lernaean hydra, which had the ability to pierce even the toughest of hides. These arrows, imbued with the hydra's venom, would be more than enough to bring down the Stymphalian birds. With his bow now equipped with these enchanted arrows, Heracles began to shoot at the birds as they circled overhead. The Stymphalian birds tried to dodge the arrows, but Heracles' aim was true. One by one, the birds fell from the sky, struck by the poisoned arrows. As each bird was shot, the others began to scatter, trying to escape the deadly barrage. Heracles continued to fire his arrows methodically, taking down the flock until only a few birds remained. The relentless assault from Heracles' bow proved too much for the Stymphalian birds to withstand, and soon the sky was clear of the deadly flock. With the last of the Stymphalian birds slain, Heracles stood victorious. The birds, which had terrorized the region for so long, were no more. Their deadly metal feathers lay scattered across the ground, and the once feared flock was no longer a threat to the people of the surrounding land. Heracles had completed the task with great skill and precision, using his wits and his divine gifts to defeat a seemingly impossible enemy. The destruction of the Stymphalian birds was significant not only because it removed a terrible threat to the region, but also because it demonstrated Heracles' ability to face and conquer creatures that were not just physically strong, but that also relied on supernatural abilities. The birds' deadly feathers were a formidable weapon, and their ability to strike from the sky made them nearly unbeatable. Yet Heracles had found a way to overcome this advantage through clever tactics, using the rattle to draw them into the open and the poisoned arrows to defeat them. The sixth labor. The slaying of the Stymphalian birds marked a pivotal moment in Heracles' journey. While many of his previous labors had required brute strength, this task showcased his ability to think strategically and use his resources wisely. The birds were not a simple physical challenge. They required cunning and precision to defeat, and Heracles was able to triumph by using both his divine tools and his keen hunting instincts. In addition, the defeat of the Stymphalian birds illustrated the idea that even the most dangerous creatures in Greek mythology could be overcome by a hero who was not only strong, but also wise. Heracles' use of the bronze rattle to draw the birds out, and his ability to use the magical arrows provided by Athena demonstrated that the hero was not just a muscle-bound brute, but a figure who could adapt to his challenges and use his intelligence to solve problems. This labor was also important because it further solidified Heracles' role as a protector of the people. By slaying the Stymphalian birds, he removed a dangerous threat from the land, ensuring that the people of the region could live without fear of the deadly flock. It was yet another example of Heracles' heroism, not just in terms of his personal glory, but in his service to others. The slaying of the Stymphalian birds was a testament to Heracles' bravery, intelligence, and divine favor. He overcame a terrifying and seemingly unbeatable enemy using both strength and strategy, proving once again that he was more than just a physical powerhouse. The defeat of the birds demonstrated that true heroism lies not just in defeating monsters through force, but in using one's intellect and resources to overcome the challenges that lie ahead. As Heracles moved on to his next labor, the defeat of the Stymphalian birds would remain one of his greatest victories, showcasing his ability to face any obstacle, no matter how unusual or dangerous. The seventh of Heracles' 12 labors required him to face a challenge unlike any he had encountered so far. This time, he was commanded to capture the Cretan bull, a massive and powerful animal that roamed the island of Crete. The bull, known for its great strength and violent nature, was one of the most feared creatures in Greek mythology. It had been sent by the gods to punish King Minos of Crete, but instead it became a symbol of both divine wrath and unbridled power. The Cretan bull was a creature of legend, described as a giant wild animal with a muscular body and a set of massive horns that could cause destruction with a single strike. Its strength was unparalleled, and its temper was fierce. The bull's hooves could trample through the earth like a force of nature, and its roar echoed across the land. This beast had been wreaking havoc on Crete for years, and even the bravest of warriors had failed to subdue it. It was said that the bull's ferocity was so intense that no one could even approach it without risk of death. However, King Minos of Crete had made a fatal mistake. In his arrogance, Minos had promised the gods that he would sacrifice the bull to Poseidon, the god of the sea, in exchange for a prosperous reign. But when he saw the bull's power and beauty, Minos decided to keep it for himself, choosing instead to sacrifice another animal. In anger, Poseidon cursed the bull, making it even more unruly and dangerous. The Cretan bull became a symbol of divine wrath, its violent nature growing with each passing day. King Eurystheus, ever determined to challenge Heracles and make his labors as difficult as possible, commanded Heracles to capture this uncontrollable creature. The task seemed impossible. How could one man tame a beast so mighty and ferocious? Heracles, however, was undeterred. He had faced numerous challenges before, and he knew that with patience, strategy, and strength, he could succeed. Heracles set out on his journey to Crete, prepared for the difficulty that lay ahead. The island of Crete was known for its rugged terrain and ancient ruins home to the mighty Minotaur and the legendary labyrinth. Heracles arrived on the island, and soon after, he began searching for the bull, knowing that it would be hiding in the wilds of Crete, avoiding human contact and rampaging through the fields. As Heracles traversed the island, he encountered the full force of the bull's destructive power. The Cretan bull had already caused extensive damage to the land, tramping through crops, tearing up fences, and scattering herds of cattle. The bull's reputation had spread far and wide, and the people of Crete lived in constant fear of its rampages. The animal was no mere beast. It was a force of nature, and capturing it would not be a simple task. Heracles soon discovered that the bull had taken refuge in a remote valley where it had been wreaking havoc on the local villages. The bull, seeing Heracles approach, let out a mighty roar and charged at the hero. Its eyes burned with fury, and its massive frame seemed to shake the earth beneath it. The bull was ready for a fight, and Heracles knew that he had to be prepared to face it head-on. The challenge of capturing the Cretan bull was not just about overpowering it. Heracles had to outwit the creature, using not only his strength, but his agility and hunting skills. The bull was fast, powerful, and unpredictable, and Heracles had to find a way to restrain it without getting killed in the process. A battle of strength was inevitable, but it would take more than just brute force to subdue such a mighty creature. The first encounter between Heracles and the Cretan bull was intense. The bull charged at the hero with unbelievable speed, its hooves pounding the ground like thunder. Heracles leaped out of the way just in time, narrowly avoiding the bull's sharp horns. The bull, undeterred, turned and lunged at him again. Heracles quickly realized that he couldn't defeat the bull through evasion alone. He had to face it directly. Using all of his strength and experience, Heracles grabbed the bull by its horns, wrestling with it on the ground. The bull struggled violently, but Heracles' grip was ironclad. He used his immense power to force the bull into submission, locking its head between his arms as it tried to buck him off. The two engaged in a brutal contest of strength, each one trying to outmaneuver the other. Heracles' strength was more than a match for the bull's fury, and after a fierce struggle, he managed to wrestle the animal to the ground, pinning it, with his arms wrapped around its neck. But Heracles did not stop there. Although he had gained control of the bull, he knew that simply subduing it would not be enough. He had to tame the creature and ensure that it would follow him back to King Eurystheus without causing any more destruction. Heracles, using his extraordinary strength and patience, slowly calmed the bull, speaking to it in a soothing tone as he kept it pinned to the ground. The struggle was long and difficult, but Heracles' unwavering determination finally paid off. After hours of effort, the Cretan bull was tamed. Heracles had successfully captured the powerful beast, forcing it into submission without causing any harm. Heracles stood victorious, the mighty bull, now under his control. He had proven that even the most unruly of creatures could be subdued with the right combination of strength, patience, and skill. With the bull now under control, Heracles had to transport it back to King Eurystheus. The journey was long and treacherous, but Heracles was no stranger to difficult travel. He led the bull along the rugged terrain of Crete, guiding it back toward the mainland. Along the way, the bull remained calm, but its wild nature was never fully subdued. Heracles had to remain vigilant constantly, ensuring that the bull did not break free and cause destruction along the way. The journey back was not without its challenges. At one point, the bull tried to escape breaking free and charging through a narrow pass. Heracles, however, was quick to act, using his immense strength and agility to corner the bull and regain control. After a series of struggles and close calls, Heracles finally reached the court of King Eurystheus with the bull in tow. When Eurystheus saw the mighty bull, he was both impressed and terrified. He had expected Heracles to fail, just as he had in many of his previous tasks, but the hero had once again succeeded. However, upon seeing the powerful creature in his presence, Eurystheus grew fearful of its strength and ordered Heracles to release it immediately. Despite his success, Heracles had to comply with the king's demands and let the bull go free. The Cretan bull, now released from Heracles' grasp, was returned to the wild, where it would roam freely once more. The capture of the Cretan bull was a significant achievement for Heracles, not only because it demonstrated his immense physical strength, but also because it showed his ability to subdue a creature that was both wild and unpredictable. This labor tested his skills as a hunter-wrestler and tactician, forcing him to think quickly and use his surroundings to his advantage. The bull was not an enemy to be defeated through violence alone. It was a creature to be tamed and controlled, and Heracles was able to accomplish this feat through a combination of force, patience, and intelligence. In many ways, this labor represents a turning point in Heracles' journey. While many of his tasks had involved defeating monsters and overcoming great odds, this labor required him to show mastery over the natural world to assert control over a powerful creature. It also serves as a reminder that not all battles are won by sheer strength alone. Sometimes the true measure of a hero lies in his ability to tame and control the wild forces of nature. For Heracles, the task of capturing the Cretan bull was just one more victory on his long and arduous journey. But it was also a victory over the forces of chaos and destruction that threatened to overwhelm the world. With the bull under his control, Heracles once again proved that no task, no matter how difficult or dangerous, was beyond his ability to overcome. The seventh labor, the capture of the Cretan bull, was another test of Heracles' strength and skill. He faced the powerful bull in a contest of wills, subduing it with his brute strength and patience. This labor not only demonstrated Heracles' physical prowess, but also showcased his ability to tame and control the wild creatures of the world. Though the bull was released after being captured, Heracles had once again proven his ability to accomplish what others thought impossible, moving one step closer to completing the 12 labors. As Heracles continued his journey, each task would push him to his limits, but the capture of the Cretan bull would stand as a testament to his versatility and his unyielding determination. The eighth of Heracles' 12 labors was one of the most dangerous and bizarre challenges. He faced a task that involved stealing the mares of Diomedes. Diomedes, the tyrant king of Thrace, owned a herd of 4 incredible horses that were unlike any ordinary beasts. These horses, while magnificent in appearance, were wild, violent, and most terrifying of all man-eating. The mares of Diomedes were not simply dangerous due to their size or speed. These horses had been bred to be savage and uncontrollable, with a diet that consisted of human flesh. Diomedes had trained his horses to feast on the flesh of anyone unlucky enough to be thrown into their stables. It was said that no one could approach the horses without being devoured, as they were driven by an insatiable hunger for meat. These horses were a symbol of Diomedes' cruelty and his power as a ruler, feeding his horses human prisoners as part of his sadistic regime. The task Heracles was given was to steal these man-eating horses from Diomedes and bring them back to King Eurystheus. This was no simple theft. These horses were not only dangerous, but they were fiercely protected by Diomedes and his army. Heracles knew that this would be another test of his strength, wits, and ability to confront not only beasts, but a tyrannical king. Yet, as with the previous labors, Heracles was determined to succeed. Diomedes, who ruled with an iron fist, had kept the horses in a stable guarded by his soldiers and vicious animals, making the task even more difficult. These mares were not only protected by their master's cruelty, but were trained to respond violently to any attempt at taming or stealing them. To complete the labor, Heracles would have to outsmart Diomedes and his horses, ensuring that he could steal the mares without succumbing to their savage hunger. Heracles set off to Thrace, determined to carry out the task that seemed nearly impossible. The journey was perilous, as the lands surrounding Diomedes' kingdom were filled with hostile forces, and the king's fortresses were well guarded. When Heracles arrived, he immediately encountered the ferocity of Diomedes' horses. As he approached the stables, the mares could be heard roaring with hunger and rage. They had been conditioned to devour anyone who dared come near their bloodthirsty nature, making them a true nightmare for anyone who sought to challenge them. Despite their terrifying reputation, Heracles knew that capturing these horses required more than just brute strength. He would need a plan that would allow him to get past the dangerous beasts and their cruel owner. He had to be quick and precise, as the mare's hunger for human flesh meant that every moment counted. At the same time, he had to be cautious, knowing that Diomedes would stop at nothing to protect his prized horses. Heracles, with his usual determination, approached the stables and took stock of his surroundings. The mares were kept in a large pen, heavily guarded by Diomedes' soldiers. The stables themselves were protected by armed men and vicious dogs, all under the control of Diomedes, who had grown accustomed to ruling with fear and violence. Heracles knew that he could not simply charge in and take the horses by force. He would need to outwit Diomedes and his soldiers to succeed. Heracles quickly formulated a daring and brilliant plan. He knew that the key to stealing the horses was to somehow subdue them without being killed or eaten in the process. He also realized that Diomedes' cruelty was the key to getting the mares to obey him. Heracles decided to use Diomedes himself as a means to tame the wild man-eating horses. Heracles, with his usual boldness, captured Diomedes and brought him to the stable. The tyrant king, who had grown accustomed to commanding others and feeding his horses with prisoners, was unaware that he would soon become the meal of his own beasts. Heracles, with his overwhelming strength, held Diomedes captive and offered him to the mares as food. When the mares smelled Diomedes' flesh, their savage instincts kicked in. They charged at him hungry and vicious. In an instant, Diomedes was devoured by his own horses, a fitting end for a cruel tyrant who had fed so many innocent people to his beasts. With their master dead and gone, the mares, now satiated and distracted, were subdued. Their ferocity had been momentarily tamed by the death of their cruel owner, and Heracles took advantage of this opportunity to approach the horses and gain control over them. With Diomedes out of the picture, and the mares now subdued, Heracles moved quickly to capture the horses. The mares, once ferocious and uncontrollable, had calmed down after their feast. Heracles led them from the stable, with ease, carefully guiding them out of the compound. While the horses were still wild at heart, they were no longer as ravenous and unpredictable as they had been under Diomedes' control. Heracles knew that the task was far from over. The mares were still dangerous, and the journey back to King Eurystheus would not be easy. He had to maintain control over the horses and ensure they did not escape or attack him. He led the mares across treacherous terrain, avoiding the guards and soldiers loyal to Diomedes, who would no doubt seek to stop him and reclaim the horses. Heracles had to be swift and careful, as the horses were known for their quickness and strength. A single mistake could cause the mares to break free, and Heracles would have to start the labor all over again. Despite the dangers, Heracles successfully made his way back to King Eurystheus with the mares in tow. When Eurystheus saw the powerful horses, he was struck with a mixture of awe and fear. The mares were as wild as ever, but Heracles had managed to tame them and bring them back alive. Once again, Eurystheus was impressed by Heracles' success, but his fear of the hero grew. As with other labors, Eurystheus felt threatened by Heracles' growing strength and power. The king, terrified of the mares and their power, demanded that Heracles release them. True to form, Heracles obeyed, letting the mares loose once again. The horses, freed from their temporary submission, galloped away, into the wilds of Thrace, where they were free to wreak havoc once more. Heracles' task was complete, but the horses would never be fully under anyone's control again. The stealing of the mares of Diomedes was a labor that tested Heracles not only physically, but mentally. While many of his tasks had involved defeating monsters or performing feats of strength, this labor required Heracles to outthink his opponents, both the horses and their cruel owner. By using Diomedes as a means to subdue the horses, Heracles demonstrated that true heroism often involves more than just brute force. It requires intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to turn an enemy's strengths against them. This labor also serves as a reminder of Heracles' ability to confront evil and tyranny. Diomedes, a cruel and unjust ruler, had made a living off the suffering of others, feeding his own horses with the flesh of the innocent. Heracles' defeat of Diomedes and the capture of his mares were not just victories for the hero, but also a form of justice for the people who had suffered under Diomedes' reign. By bringing the mares to King Eurystheus and then releasing them, Heracles ensured that the horses' savagery would never again be controlled by a tyrant like Diomedes. The capture of the mares of Diomedes was another triumph for Heracles, but it was also a demonstration of his cleverness and moral compass. In capturing the horses, he not only defeated a terrifying and wild beast, but also brought justice to a land ruled by tyranny. Heracles' victory was not just about physical strength. It was about using his wits and understanding the nature of his enemies to overcome them. This labor proved that while brute force was often necessary for success, intelligence and creativity were just as important in the path of a true hero. As Heracles continued on his journey, this task stood out as one of the more unusual and clever victories in his mythic career, further cementing his status as a hero who could conquer both beasts and tyrants alike. The ninth of Heracles' 12 labors was a task that brought him into direct conflict with one of the most famous and powerful warrior tribes in Greek mythology, the Amazons. The Amazons were a fierce all-female society known for their exceptional skill in battle, their strength, and their martial prowess. These women lived in a land far from Greece across the seas, and they were infamous for their fearlessness and the rigorous training they underwent from a young age. The task Heracles was given was to obtain the magical belt, also called a girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. The belt of Hippolyta was a powerful and enchanted object crafted by the gods. It was a symbol of the Amazonian queen's authority and power. The belt granted Hippolyta special strength and was highly coveted by kings and warriors, as it was said to imbue its wearer with divine favor. For King Eurystheus, who wanted to continue testing Heracles' mettle, obtaining this magical belt seemed like the perfect challenge. Not only was the belt a prize of great value, but its possession would also signal Heracles' ability to conquer the mighty Amazons, a tribe that no other man had ever defeated. Heracles knew that this would be no simple task. The Amazons were known for their fierce defense of their land and their queen, and they did not take kindly to outsiders trying to steal from them. Heracles would have to rely on his strength, his charisma, and his wit to acquire the belt, and the way he went about it, whether through diplomacy or battle, would depend on how he approached the situation. Heracles set out on his journey, traveling to the distant land where the Amazons lived. The voyage itself was treacherous, as the Amazons' territory was located far to the east beyond the seas. Heracles faced numerous dangers along the way, from hostile territories to unpredictable weather. Yet his resolve never wavered, and he pressed on toward his goal. Upon reaching the shores of the Amazonian lands, Heracles encountered the first of many obstacles. The Amazons were a warrior race, and any man who dared to approach their borders would be met with immediate resistance. Heracles was well aware of this, but he was determined to succeed. He sent emissaries ahead to communicate his intentions, explaining that he had come for the belt of Hippolyta, as instructed by King Eurystheus. However, the Amazons were wary of outsiders and refused to entertain the idea of surrendering such a precious artifact. Despite their hesitation, Heracles was granted an audience with Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. Known for her beauty, wisdom, and strength, Hippolyta was not easily swayed. Heracles stood before her, explaining the task he had been given and asking for her cooperation. However, as he did so, he realized that gaining the queen's favor would not be as simple as just asking for the belt. The Amazons had a deep sense of pride and honor, and they did not give away their treasures easily. At this point, the myth diverges depending on the version of the story. In some versions, Heracles successfully convinces Hippolyta to give him the belt through diplomacy, while in others, a more violent conflict ensues. Both outcomes reveal different aspects of Heracles' character, his ability to negotiate and charm, as well as his willingness to fight when necessary. In the most peaceful version of the myth, Heracles, using his natural charm and diplomacy, is able to persuade Hippolyta to give him the belt voluntarily. Heracles speaks to her with respect and acknowledges her power as a queen and warrior. He explains the reasons for his quest and assures her that he means no harm. Moved by his words and his courage, Hippolyta decides to trust him and agrees to give him the belt. This version of the story shows Heracles not just as a hero of brute strength, but as one capable of diplomacy and persuasion. It highlights his ability to understand the power dynamics at play and to use words instead of force to achieve his goals. Hippolyta, recognizing his sincerity and strength, agrees to part with the belt, and Heracles returns triumphantly to King Eurystheus. However, Heracles' success in this version of the myth is not without its consequences. Some versions of the story suggest that the Amazons, displeased by Hippolyta's decision to give up the belt, later turn against Heracles, leading to a battle between the hero and the Amazons. Even though Heracles obtained the belt, the Amazons are not content to simply let him go, and this leads to further conflict. In a more dramatic version of the myth, Heracles' attempt to acquire the belt leads to a fierce battle with the Amazons. When Hippolyta initially refuses to give up the belt, Heracles is left with no choice but to fight. The Amazons, known for their exceptional combat skills, quickly engage Heracles and his companions in a brutal battle. The two sides clash fiercely, with Heracles and the Amazons exchanging blows, each side determined to win. Heracles, though outnumbered, fights valiantly, demonstrating his superior strength and skill in combat. He cuts through the Amazonian warriors with his sword, but the battle grows more intense as more Amazons arrive to defend their queen. In some versions of the myth, Heracles manages to defeat many of the Amazons, but in others, it is the intervention of the gods or other circumstances that tip the scales in his favor. In the heat of the battle, Heracles eventually manages to seize the belt from Hippolyta, either by force or through a clever maneuver. Once he possesses the belt, Heracles retreats with it, leaving the Amazons behind. The battle does not end in total victory for Heracles, as the Amazons continue to resist and sometimes even pursue him, but he successfully completes his task. In some versions, he must fight his way back to his ship, where he and his companions escape with the belt. This version of the myth emphasizes Heracles' physical prowess and his ability to defeat even the fiercest of warriors. It portrays him as a hero who will do whatever it takes to complete his labors, even if it means engaging in battle and spilling blood. This version also highlights the complex relationships between Heracles and the people he encounters, as his actions often lead to further conflict, even when his ultimate goal is accomplished. After obtaining the belt from Hippolyta, whether through diplomacy or battle, Heracles made his way back to King Eurystheus. The journey back was not as treacherous as the one to the Amazonian lands, but Heracles was still wary of the Amazons who might seek retribution for the theft of their queen's belt. Once he returned to the court of Eurystheus, he presented the magical belt as proof of his success. Eurystheus, once again, was both impressed and terrified by Heracles' ability to complete the task. He marveled at the strength and cunning it had taken to defeat the Amazons and obtain the magical belt. However, as with many of his other labors, Eurystheus was not content to simply reward Heracles. Instead, he sought to continue testing Heracles with more impossible tasks. The belt of Hippolyta was a symbol of Heracles' success in overcoming the powerful and dangerous Amazons. By obtaining it, he not only demonstrated his physical prowess, but also his ability to navigate complex social and political situations, whether through diplomacy or combat. Labor 9. Obtaining the belt of Hippolyta was another crucial test for Heracles, both as a warrior and as a negotiator. The task required more than just brute strength. It required the ability to deal with a powerful and formidable adversary who would not be easily swayed. Heracles' ability to secure the belt, whether through diplomacy or battle, showcases his versatility and cunning as a hero. This labor also represents a turning point in Heracles' journey. He is not just fighting monsters and completing physical feats. He is engaging with societies, kingdoms, and powerful individuals. His interaction with the Amazons, a fierce warrior race, shows that heroism is not always about defeating enemies through violence, but also about understanding and navigating the dynamics of power and respect. The story of Heracles and the belt of Hippolyta also underscores themes of justice and balance. By acquiring the belt, Heracles symbolically brings balance to the world, taking the magical artifact from a queen who had used it for power and influence and bringing it to the king who demanded it, even if the means were not always ideal. Stealing the belt of Hippolyta was a complex and multifaceted challenge for Heracles. It required more than just fighting strength. It demanded diplomacy, wisdom, and the ability to navigate the complex dynamics of powerful societies. Whether through negotiation or force, Heracles succeeded in acquiring the magical belt, proving that he could overcome not just beasts and monsters, but also the formidable power of human rulers and warrior nations. This labor, like all the others, solidified his place as one of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology, capable of succeeding in any situation, no matter how difficult or complex. As Heracles continued on his journey, the belt of Hippolyta remained a testament to his strategic thinking, combat prowess, and ability to face down even the most powerful foes, both on the battlefield and in the courts of kings and queens. The 10th of Heracles' 12 labors was one of the most challenging and daunting tasks he had faced, and it would take him to the farthest reaches of the known world. This time, Heracles was tasked with capturing the cattle of Geryon, a fearsome and strange creature who was no ordinary monster. Geryon was a unique and terrifying figure in Greek mythology. He was a three-bodied monster with 3 heads and 6 arms, each body joined at the waist. His appearance alone made him a formidable opponent, but his strength and viciousness were equally terrifying. Geryon was the ruler of a distant and isolated land known as the island of Erythea, which was located far to the west beyond the known borders of Greece. He was a mighty and cruel being who owned a herd of magnificent cattle, which were said to be the most beautiful and powerful animals in the world. The cattle were a symbol of Geryon's dominance and power, and they were fiercely protected by him and his 2-headed dog Orthrus. The cattle of Geryon were not only prized for their beauty, but were also protected by an impenetrable fortress of strength. No one had ever dared to steal them, and many who had attempted to do so had met a gruesome end at the hands of Geryon and his guardians. To succeed in this labor, Heracles would not only have to face the monstrous Geryon, but also his 2-headed dog Orthrus and a series of dangerous trials along the way. Upon receiving the task from King Eurystheus, Heracles began his journey to the distant land of Geryon, knowing that this labor would take him far from home and into the heart of danger. The road to Erythea was long and treacherous, and Heracles faced a series of obstacles and challenges along the way. He had to cross seas, navigate through deserts, and brave wild and hostile lands. One of the first challenges Heracles encountered on his journey was the massive river Oceanus, which separated the known world from the distant lands beyond. In some versions of the myth, Heracles is said to have crossed the river by borrowing the golden cup of the sun god Helios, who lent it to Heracles as a boat. In other versions, he managed to build a raft and brave the turbulent waters alone. Upon reaching the island of Erythea, Heracles found that the land was as harsh and dangerous as he had imagined. The island was desolate and filled with wild creatures, and there were few signs of civilization. It was the perfect domain for a monster like Geryon, who had made the land his own kingdom. Heracles was determined, however, and pressed on, knowing that his task was to find and capture Geryon's herd of cattle, no matter the danger. After making his way through the island, Heracles finally encountered Geryon. The monster was a grotesque sight, 3 bodies joined at the waist, each with a head of its own and 6 muscular arms. Geryon towered over Heracles, his eyes glowing with an ominous light. As a creature of great strength and terrifying appearance, Geryon was an intimidating foe, and Heracles knew that defeating him would not be an easy task. In addition to Geryon's terrifying form, the monster was protected by his loyal, 2-headed dog Orthrus. Orthrus, like his master, was a vicious creature, capable of tearing through any enemy with his powerful jaws. The dog was an incredibly fast and agile guardian, and he would not let anyone approach the cattle without a fight. Geryon, upon seeing Heracles approach, immediately ordered Orthrus to attack. The 2-headed dog charged at the hero, growling and snapping its jaws. Heracles, however, was not intimidated. He drew his club and fought back, using his immense strength to battle the vicious creature. After a fierce struggle, Heracles managed to defeat Orthrus, striking him down with a powerful blow to the head. The 2-headed dog was no more, but this was just the beginning. Heracles had now eliminated one of Geryon's guardians, but the real battle was yet to come. Geryon himself was still standing, and he would not go down without a fight. With Orthrus defeated, Heracles turned his attention to Geryon. The three-bodied monster towered over him, and Geryon wasted no time in attacking. He hurled massive boulders at Heracles, trying to crush him with his immense strength. The hero dodged and weaved narrowly, avoiding the deadly projectiles. Geryon's three heads worked in unison, coordinating the attack as he fought with terrifying precision. Heracles, however, was no stranger to battling mighty opponents, and he was prepared for the fight. Drawing his bow, Heracles fired a series of arrows at Geryon. However, Geryon's three bodies were nearly impervious to arrows, and the monster simply shrugged off the attacks. Heracles quickly realized that he would need to fight Geryon in close combat to have any hope of defeating him. The battle between Heracles and Geryon raged on for hours. The hero used his immense strength to overpower Geryon, grappling with the three-bodied monster and trying to gain an advantage. Geryon fought back with all his might, using his 6 arms to strike Heracles from every direction. It was a battle of endurance, with both combatants pushing each other to their limits. Finally, after a long and exhausting struggle, Heracles managed to deliver a decisive blow. He struck Geryon's central body, the heart of the monster's power, with a powerful thrust of his spear. Geryon let out a final scream as he fell to the ground defeated. The three-bodied monster had been slain. With Geryon defeated, Heracles turned his attention to the herd of cattle that had been so fiercely guarded. The cattle, which were magnificent and powerful animals, had been left to roam freely across the island. Despite their beauty and grace, the cattle were fiercely protective of their land, and Heracles knew that he would need to corral them and guide them back to Eurystheus. Heracles used his strength and experience as a herder to capture the cattle, carefully driving them toward the coast. The journey back was not without its challenges, as the cattle were wild and difficult to control. At one point, Heracles had to deal with a wild storm that threatened to scatter the herd, but he pressed on, determined to complete his task. After a long and arduous journey, Heracles successfully brought the cattle back to King Eurystheus. The hero presented the herd to the king, completing yet another impossible task. As with the other labors, Eurystheus was both impressed and terrified by Heracles' success, but instead of rewarding him, the king once again found a way to belittle the hero's achievement. In some versions of the myth, Eurystheus is said to have been so frightened of the cattle that he ordered them to be sacrificed immediately. Capturing the cattle of Geryon was one of Heracles' most difficult and heroic labors, not only because he had to defeat a fearsome monster, but also because he had to deal with the elements, the fierce guardians, and the wild cattle themselves. This labor tested Heracles' strength, resilience, and ingenuity in overcoming a creature that was nearly invincible. The defeat of Geryon represented a triumph over an impossible foe. Not only did Heracles have to fight the monster himself, but he also had to navigate the dangerous and hostile environment of Geryon's island. The labor showcased Heracles' resourcefulness and his ability to adapt to whatever challenges lay before him. Moreover, this labor reflected Heracles' role as a protector of order. Geryon's cattle, symbols of his power and tyranny, were taken from him and brought under the control of Eurystheus. In a way, this labor symbolizes Heracles bringing balance to a world where powerful and dangerous beings like Geryon threaten to disrupt the natural order. The capture of the cattle of Geryon was one of Heracles' most complex and demanding labors, involving not only a battle with a powerful monster, but also the management of wild beasts. Heracles' victory was not just a physical triumph. It was also a testament to his perseverance, resourcefulness, and ability to overcome overwhelming odds. The defeat of Geryon and the capture of his cattle proved once again that Heracles could conquer any challenge, no matter how monstrous or difficult, and that his status as one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology was well earned. The 11th of Heracles' 12 labors was one of the most challenging and fantastical quests in his journey. This time, Heracles was tasked with stealing the apples of the Hesperides' magical fruits that were not only beautiful, but incredibly powerful. The apples, which were golden in color, had been given to the goddess Hera as a wedding gift by Gaia, the earth goddess, and they were located in a mythical garden at the edge of the world. The garden itself was no ordinary place. It was situated in a remote and inaccessible part of the world beyond the known realms at the westernmost edge of the earth. It was guarded by the Hesperides, the nymphs of the evening who were tasked with protecting the garden and its sacred fruits. But the most formidable guardian of all was a terrifying dragon named Ladon. Ladon, a multi-headed serpent-like creature, was said to be immune to sleep and vigilant at all times. He circled the garden, keeping a watchful eye on the apples and ensuring that no one could steal them. The apples of the Hesperides were no mere fruit. They were imbued with divine power and were said to grant immortality to anyone who consumed them. Because of this, they were highly coveted by gods and mortals alike, and many had tried and failed to steal them. The task of obtaining these apples was not only about overcoming the physical dangers of the garden and the dragon, but also about navigating the treacherous paths of gods, nymphs, and fate. For Heracles, the challenge was particularly daunting. To complete the labor, he would have to outwit the Hesperides' defeat or avoid Ladon and somehow obtain the apples without angering the gods. This task required more than just physical strength. It required cunning diplomacy and resourcefulness. Heracles' journey to the Garden of the Hesperides was long and arduous. The garden was located at the edge of the known world near the Western Ocean, and it was said to be protected by various dangers and hostile creatures. Heracles set out traveling through hostile territories and facing numerous obstacles along the way. He crossed deserts, fought monsters, and navigated perilous seas to finally arrive at the land that bordered the garden. Upon reaching the garden's vicinity, Heracles discovered that it was not easy to access. The garden was surrounded by impassable mountains, thick forests, and wild terrain. He needed to find a way to gain entry to the garden where the apples were kept, and this was where he had to use his wit and intelligence. After much searching, Heracles encountered a number of gods and heroes who offered their help or guidance. One of the most important encounters was with the Titan Atlas, a figure who played a crucial role in this labor. Atlas was known for his strength and his role in holding up the heavens, and it was through him that Heracles would find a way to obtain the apples. However, the encounter was not one of simple friendship. Heracles would have to employ diplomacy and cunning to gain Atlas' cooperation. Heracles knew that defeating Ladon and the Hesperides outright would be impossible, so he sought another way to accomplish his task. This was where he met Atlas, who, according to some versions of the myth, had been holding up the sky as punishment for defying Zeus. Atlas knew the way to the garden and was familiar with the dangers there, but he could not simply walk away from his burden of holding up the heavens. Heracles, ever the problem solver, proposed a clever solution. He would temporarily hold up the sky in Atlas's place if Atlas would go to the garden and retrieve the apples for him. Atlas, seeing the opportunity to take a brief respite from his eternal burden, agreed to the arrangement. Heracles with great strength, took on the weight of the heavens, holding the sky upon his shoulders, while Atlas made his way to the garden to obtain the apples. However, upon returning with the apples, Atlas had a change of heart. He had grown tired of his eternal punishment and decided that he would keep the apples for himself, leaving Heracles with the sky to bear. In this moment, Heracles' quick thinking and cleverness were put to the test. Rather than outright confrontation, he used wit to solve the problem. Heracles, knowing that Atlas could not keep the apples without returning to his eternal burden, told Atlas that he would happily continue holding the sky, but only if Atlas agreed to relieve him momentarily so he could readjust his position. Atlas, eager to get rid of the burden, temporarily agreed. As soon as Atlas took the sky back, Heracles swiftly took the apples and made his escape. This part of the myth highlights Heracles' ability to think on his feet, using his intellect to turn a seemingly impossible situation into a victory. Rather than fighting Atlas, he relied on diplomacy and trickery, manipulating the situation to his advantage. This clever solution allowed Heracles to fulfill the task without resorting to violence. The apples of the Hesperides were not just beautiful fruit, they held immense mythological significance. As gifts from Gaia to Hera, they were symbols of fertility, immortality, and divine favor. By obtaining them, Heracles was not only completing a labor imposed by King Eurystheus, but also challenging the very order of things established by the gods. In many ways, the apples were more than just an object to be stolen. They represented divine power, and Heracles' ability to acquire them showed his place in the larger mythological world as a hero who could accomplish what gods and mortals alike found impossible. While Heracles' victory over the Hesperides was a significant achievement, it also had larger ramifications in the mythological narrative. By taking the apples, Heracles had completed a task that was not just about strength or might, but also about understanding the divine dynamics at play. Hera, the goddess, who had originally been gifted the apples, was not pleased with Heracles' success. In some versions of the myth, Hera later sent him on even more difficult tasks, and the apples of the Hesperides remained a symbol of the ongoing struggle between Heracles and the gods. Heracles' cleverness in dealing with Atlas and his ability to outwit the powerful beings he encountered throughout the labor further solidified his place as one of the most revered heroes in Greek mythology. The apples, while a prize, were also a means for Heracles to prove his worthiness, not just as a physically strong hero, but as someone who could navigate the divine world with wit and resourcefulness. Upon completing his task, Heracles returned to King Eurystheus with the apples in hand. The king once again was both impressed and terrified by Heracles' success. The apples were indeed a remarkable prize, and Heracles had proven that no task, no matter how impossible it seemed, could thwart him. However true to form, Eurystheus was not content to simply reward the hero. He was wary of Heracles' growing success and wanted to continue testing him. In some versions of the myth, Eurystheus is so terrified by the apple's power that he orders them to be returned to the garden, and Heracles must once again face the challenges of dealing with Hera's anger and the consequences of his actions. The apples, however, remained a symbol of Heracles' triumph, and his success in completing this labor added another notch to his legendary status. The task of stealing the apples of the Hesperides represents a key turning point in Heracles' journey. Unlike the previous labors that involved brute force, this task required Heracles to use his wit, diplomacy, and quick thinking to achieve his goal. It highlights the hero's ability to engage not only with physical challenges, but also with the divine forces that shape the world around him. Heracles' interaction with Atlas and his clever manipulation of the situation emphasize the theme of heroism in Greek mythology, where intelligence and cunning often play as important a role as strength. In obtaining the apples, Heracles demonstrated that overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges required more than just raw power. It required adaptability, cleverness, and an understanding of the larger cosmic forces at play. Furthermore, the apples of the Hesperides serve as a symbol of immortality and divine favor. By securing them, Heracles not only completes a difficult labor, but also reaffirms his place in the world of gods and men, establishing his reputation as one of the greatest heroes to ever live. The task of stealing the apples of the Hesperides was one of the most complex and layered challenges Heracles faced. It required him to use not only his physical prowess, but his intelligence and wit, navigating the divine world and overcoming both mortal and immortal obstacles. Through diplomacy, trickery, and clever problem-solving, Heracles succeeded in obtaining the apples, a feat that further solidified his legendary status. This labor, like the others, was not just about achieving a goal, but also about understanding the deeper forces at play in the world and navigating them to ensure success. Heracles' success in stealing the apples was a victory not just for him, but for all heroes who would face insurmountable odds in the future, demonstrating that true heroism comes from not only the strength to overcome challenges, but the mind to outwit them. The 12th and final labor of Heracles was the most dangerous and difficult of all, a task that would require him to descend into the very depths of the underworld itself to capture Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guarded the gates of Hades. Cerberus was a monstrous and terrifying creature, known for his ferocious nature, and the fact that he never allowed anyone to enter or leave the underworld without his master's permission. As the guardian of the dead Cerberus was an immortal beast feared by both gods and mortals alike. Unlike the previous labors, which had involved physical battles with monsters, the capture of Cerberus was not only a test of Heracles' strength, but also of his courage, willpower, and resourcefulness. To succeed, he would have to venture into the realm of the dead, confront the terrifying creatures and gods of the underworld, and somehow bring Cerberus back to the world of the living, alive and unharmed. The task seemed impossible even for a hero as mighty as Heracles, but this final labor would prove whether or not he truly deserved to be considered one of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology. King Eurystheus, ever fearful of Heracles' success and growing power, had no doubt that this labor would end in failure. He believed that the underworld was a place where even the strongest heroes could not survive, and so he gave Heracles this final task, thinking that it would be his undoing. However, Heracles was determined to complete the task, not only to fulfill his labors, but also to prove that there was no challenge beyond his ability to overcome. To capture Cerberus, Heracles first had to descend into the underworld. This was a perilous journey, as few mortals, or even gods, had ever ventured into Hades and returned. The underworld, the realm of the dead, was a dark, frightening place ruled by the god Hades and his queen Persephone. The journey to the underworld required traveling through treacherous paths and crossing the rivers that separated the land of the living from the land of the dead. Heracles, however, had already proven his ability to overcome even the greatest challenges, and so he set out to find a way into the underworld. He sought the advice and help of several gods and figures from Greek mythology. One of the key figures who aided him was Hermes, the messenger god, who provided Heracles with guidance on how to navigate the underworld and survive the dangers that lay ahead. Hermes, known for his speed and cunning, had experience in traveling to and from the underworld, and he advised Heracles on how to approach Hades and Persephone. In addition to Hermes, Heracles sought the help of the god of the sea, Poseidon. Poseidon was able to help Heracles by providing him with a powerful trident, which would be useful in the event that Heracles needed to defend himself against hostile creatures or obstacles on his journey. With the support of these divine figures, Heracles was ready to embark on the most dangerous journey of his life. Heracles descended into the underworld through a cave near the entrance to the land of the dead, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were weakest. As he ventured deeper into the realm of Hades, he encountered a host of terrifying creatures, including the Furies and the souls of the dead. But Heracles was not intimidated. He was determined to reach Cerberus and complete his final labor. After overcoming the various dangers of the underworld, Heracles finally reached the gates of Hades' domain where Cerberus stood watch. The three-headed dog was a fearsome sight to behold. Each of Cerberus's 3 heads had a set of sharp, deadly teeth, and his body was covered in dark, bristling fur. He was large enough to block the gates of the underworld, and his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Cerberus was no mere animal. He was a divine being imbued with immense strength and power. As Heracles approached the gates, Cerberus immediately growled, his 3 heads barking in unison. The beast recognized Heracles as a hero, but he did not let that stop him from attacking. The first head lunged forward, snapping its jaws at Heracles, while the second head followed with a terrifying bite. Heracles, using his incredible reflexes and strength, dodged the first attack and grabbed Cerberus by the neck. However, this was no ordinary dog, and Heracles knew that the creature's strength and power were almost unmatched. Heracles was faced with a choice. Should he fight Cerberus with his usual force and strength, or should he try to subdue the beast in another way? Heracles realized that a direct confrontation with Cerberus might prove disastrous, as the dog's size and power made him a formidable opponent. Instead, he decided to use his unique skills to capture the creature alive. Heracles had always been a master of wrestling, and he realized that he could use his wrestling skills to overpower Cerberus. With all of his might, Heracles wrestled the 3-headed dog to the ground, using his powerful limbs to pin Cerberus down. The battle was long and grueling, with the monster thrashing and biting, but Heracles' strength and endurance eventually wore Cerberus down. With Cerberus subdued, Heracles faced the daunting task of bringing the 3-headed dog back to King Eurystheus. Heracles knew that the journey out of the underworld would be just as difficult as the one he had taken to enter it. He had to navigate the dangerous path back, avoiding any further dangers, and ensuring that Cerberus did not escape. In some versions of the myth, Heracles encounters even more challenges on his way back. Cerberus, although subdued, was still a powerful and dangerous creature, and Heracles had to maintain control over him throughout the journey. The gods and creatures of the underworld did not take kindly to the theft of Cerberus, and Heracles had to be vigilant in order to ensure that Cerberus was returned safely to the mortal realm. Along the way, Heracles encountered additional obstacles, including hostile spirits and souls of the dead who attempted to prevent him from completing his mission. However, Heracles' determination and strength never wavered. With Cerberus in tow, Heracles finally reached the surface and emerged from the underworld victorious. Upon his return, Heracles presented Cerberus to King Eurystheus. The king, as expected, was horrified by the sight of the terrifying three-headed dog. Cerberus was a creature so powerful and dangerous that Eurystheus was struck with fear. Heracles had accomplished the impossible, and Eurystheus, unable to comprehend how someone could defeat the guardian of the underworld, ordered that Cerberus be released back to Hades. The capture of Cerberus, however, was more than just the completion of a labor. It was the culmination of Heracles' heroic journey. He had not only defeated monsters and completed impossible tasks, but he had also faced the ultimate test, descending into the underworld itself, confronting death, and returning with the most feared creature of the underworld. It was a moment that solidified his place as one of the greatest heroes in Greek mythology. Though Eurystheus ordered Cerberus's release, the task proved Heracles' bravery and resilience. It was a final demonstration of his ability to face the impossible head-on and emerge victorious. His journey through the underworld and his battle with Cerberus were not just about strength, but also about the hero's undying will to complete any task set before him. Unlike the previous labors, which required defeating monsters or obtaining rare items, this task required him to confront death itself. Cerberus was a guardian of the underworld, a creature that embodied the very concept of mortality and the afterlife. By capturing Cerberus, Heracles not only completed the most difficult labor, but also symbolically overcame death itself. This labor also marks the culmination of Heracles' journey, demonstrating that no challenge, no matter how insurmountable, was beyond his ability to overcome. It highlighted his unparalleled courage, his physical strength, and his determination to face even the most terrifying and impossible challenges. Heracles had completed his 12 labors, but his journey was far from over. His victory over Cerberus would become one of the most iconic feats in Greek mythology, symbolizing his heroism, his resolve, and his immortality in the annals of myth. Capturing Cerberus was a fitting conclusion to Heracles' legendary 12 labors. This final task required Heracles to descend into the underworld, confront the terrifying three-headed dog, and bring it back to King Eurystheus. Heracles' triumph over Cerberus was not only a victory of strength, but also a symbol of his indomitable will and heroic resolve. The labor proved that no task, no matter how difficult or dangerous, was beyond Heracles' ability to complete. His success in capturing Cerberus and returning with him from the depths of the underworld was the crowning achievement of his heroic journey, solidifying his place in Greek mythology as one of the greatest heroes of all time. After completing the 12 labors, Heracles should have been able to rest and enjoy the rewards of his incredible feats. However, his life post-labors was far from peaceful or tranquil. The labors, which had already tested him physically and emotionally, were only a part of Heracles' complex and tragic destiny. Though he had fulfilled his promise to King Eurystheus and had achieved greatness, Heracles continued to face new challenges, both external and internal, that would shape the rest of his life. Heracles' fame grew after his completion of the labors. The gods and mortals alike began to revere him as a hero of immense strength and courage. Yet with this recognition came new challenges. His remarkable achievements had not gone unnoticed, and Heracles quickly found himself embroiled in conflicts with gods, kings, and even his own personal flaws. He had been a pawn in the hands of the gods for many years, and his destiny seemed to be shaped by divine influence. Even after he had completed his tasks, Heracles could not escape the influence of the gods. Hera, who had been one of the primary forces behind his labors, continued to despise him, and she would not allow him to live in peace. Zeus, though a fatherly figure in Heracles' life, could not shield him entirely from the consequences of his actions and the continuing wrath of other gods. Heracles' life after the labors was one of constant struggle and conflict, a hero who had done the impossible, but was never fully freed from the burden of divine intervention. One of the most significant events in Heracles' life after completing the labors was his marriage to Deianira, a beautiful princess from Calydon. Their union, which began with love and promise, would ultimately lead to a tragic end. Deianira had been wooed by Heracles after he fought and defeated the river god Achelous, who had also sought her hand in marriage. Heracles' victory over Achelous was another display of his strength, and Deianira, impressed by his bravery, accepted his proposal. Initially, the marriage was happy, and Heracles and Deianira lived together in harmony. However, the peace would not last long, as Heracles' past and his actions would eventually bring tragedy to their lives. The couple's downfall began when Heracles embarked on another adventure. During his travels, he encountered a centaur named Nessus, who attempted to abduct Deianira. Heracles, ever the protector of his loved ones, intervened and shot Nessus with a poisoned arrow. As he lay dying, Nessus, in his final act of revenge, tricked Deianira into believing that his blood, which had been tainted by the poison, would serve as a love potion to ensure Heracles' fidelity. Deianira, fearing that Heracles might abandon her for another woman, took the blood-soaked shirt from Nessus and kept it in a vial. She believed that by giving Heracles the shirt, she could ensure his devotion to her. However, the blood from Nessus was not a love potion, it was a deadly poison. When Heracles later wore the shirt, the poison began to burn through his skin, causing excruciating pain. In an attempt to alleviate his suffering, Heracles sought out help from the gods, but they were unable to undo the effects of the poison. The agony was unbearable, and Heracles, knowing that death was inevitable, built his own funeral pyre. His final moments were marked by intense suffering, but they also became an opportunity for Heracles to achieve something greater, his ascension to immortality. Despite the tragedy of his death, Heracles' fate was somewhat redeemed by Zeus, who took him to Mount Olympus. There he was granted eternal life, and his place among the gods was secured. Heracles was finally freed from the suffering that had plagued him throughout his mortal life, and he was reconciled with Hera, who in the end welcomed him into the divine realm. However, his death was a reminder of the harsh and often tragic consequences of his actions and the influence of the gods in his life. Heracles' life and struggles were in many ways shaped by the influence of the gods, both during his labors and after their completion. The gods played an essential role in determining his fate, and their involvement in his life was far from over after the labors were completed. Hera, the goddess who had caused much of Heracles' suffering during his youth and throughout his labors, continued to be a powerful force in his life. Hera's hatred of Heracles never waned, and her attempts to destroy him did not end with the completion of the labors. Heracles' suffering during his marriage to Deianira, caused by the poisoned shirt of Nessus, can be seen as yet another example of Hera's continuing wrath. Though Hera did not actively intervene in the same way she had during the labors, Her actions still loomed large in Heracles' life. At the same time, Zeus, Heracles' father, played a critical role in his hero's ultimate redemption. Despite Hera's continued animosity toward Heracles, Zeus eventually intervened to secure Heracles' place in the divine realm. Zeus, as the king of the gods, had the power to bring Heracles to Mount Olympus and grant him immortality. This was a final act of redemption for Heracles, allowing him to escape the pain and suffering of his mortal existence and become one of the gods. The gods' intervention in Heracles' life, both good and bad, was a defining characteristic of his existence. Heracles, despite his immense strength and bravery, was always subject to the will of the gods, whose whims often shaped his fate. In a way, the labors and Heracles' later life were a demonstration of the gods' power over mortals. Heracles' ability to complete the labors did not free him from their influence. Even in his final moments, the gods' will was evident in his suffering death and eventual ascension to Olympus. Heracles' return to normal life after completing the 12 labors was far from peaceful. He continued to face challenges, both external and internal, including the wrath of the gods, his personal flaws, and his ultimate tragic end. His marriage to Deianira, which was initially full of promise, eventually led to heartbreak and death due to the poisonous blood of Nessus. Despite his suffering, Heracles' legacy endured, and he was ultimately granted immortality by Zeus, securing his place among the gods. Heracles' life, both as a mortal and as a divine being, was shaped by the influence of the gods, particularly Hera and Zeus. While Hera's wrath continued to haunt him, Zeus ensured his redemption, in the end taking him to Olympus, where he was welcomed as one of the gods. Heracles' legacy, marked by his strength, resilience, and eventual ascension, remains one of the most enduring and influential myths in all of Greek mythology. Even after his death, the hero's influence and lessons live on, symbolizing the complexity of fate, the gods, and the enduring struggle of the hero's journey. Although Heracles had completed the 12 labors and achieved unparalleled fame as a hero, his life after the labors was far from peaceful or happy. His ultimate death, like much of his life, was tragic and intertwined with the workings of fate and the gods. The chain of events leading to his death began with a seemingly innocent and minor act, a gift that would soon bring untold suffering. While traveling with his wife, Deianira, Heracles encountered the centaur Nessus, who attempted to abduct Deianira as she crossed a river. In a violent confrontation, Heracles killed Nessus with one of his poisoned arrows. As he lay dying, Nessus, seeking vengeance, gave Deianira a vial of his blood, telling her that it was a powerful love potion, one that would ensure Heracles' eternal love and loyalty. Years later, when Heracles returned from another adventure and was away, Deianira grew suspicious of his growing affection for another woman, Iole. Fearing that Heracles might abandon her, Deianira took the vial of Nessus' blood and smeared it on a robe, believing that it would ensure Heracles' devotion. She then sent the robe to Heracles, unaware of its deadly nature. When Heracles donned the robe, the poison from Nessus' blood began to burn through his skin. The pain was excruciating, and no matter what remedies were tried, the poison could not be undone. Heracles' body began to decay from the inside out, his strength faltering despite his immense power. This cruel twist of fate, the result of the poison in the blood of Nessus, marked the beginning of Heracles' tragic end. Heracles, suffering unbearable pain, knew that his life as a mortal was coming to an end. Unable to withstand the torment, he ordered that a funeral pyre be prepared so that he could end his suffering. His final moments were filled with both physical agony and emotional turmoil. He had conquered so many challenges, fought gods, monsters, and titans, but he could not escape the curse of Nessus's blood. As Heracles lay on his funeral pyre, suffering from the poison, his fate took a dramatic turn. The gods who had always been involved in his life were unable to ignore the immense suffering of the hero who had endured so much for them and for humanity. Despite his flaws and the tragedies he had faced, Heracles had proven his valor, courage, and endurance beyond measure. The gods saw in Heracles a being who had, despite his mortal flaws, endured more than anyone should have. For his incredible feats and perseverance in the face of unimaginable pain, Zeus, his divine father, decided to reward his son by granting him immortality. This was not only a reward for the suffering Heracles had endured, but also a final act of redemption for a man who had long been punished by the gods, particularly Hera. As Heracles lay upon the pyre, Zeus intervened, sending a divine storm to snatch him from the flames and bring him to the heavens. His mortal part, the part of him that had suffered so much, was burned away, but his divine essence was transformed. He was granted a new immortal form, free from the pain and sorrow that had plagued him throughout his life. Heracles was finally free from the burden of mortality. Heracles' ascent to Olympus marked his apotheosis, the moment when he became a god. No longer would he be bound by the limitations of his human body. He was now among the gods, and his heroic deeds would forever be remembered by mortals and immortals alike. Hera, who had been one of the primary forces of his suffering, witnessed his transformation. In some versions of the myth, she was reconciled with Heracles, and they became friends in the divine realm. She even allowed him to marry her daughter Hebe, the goddess of youth, symbolizing a final act of redemption for both of them. Heracles' immortality was a reward for his unmatched strength, bravery, and endurance. But it was also a recognition of the way in which he had overcome both divine and mortal challenges. His transition from mortal hero to god was not just a physical transformation, but a spiritual one as well. He had transcended his past sufferings, and now, as a god, he would continue to live among the Olympian gods. As a god, Heracles' role in the divine realm was significant. He became a symbol of strength, courage, and redemption in the eyes of the gods and mortals. Heracles' story was one of extreme hardship, but also one of overcoming these hardships through willpower, intelligence, and divine intervention. His place in the divine realm was not just as a hero of the past, but as a symbol of how even the most difficult of lives could lead to ultimate redemption. In Olympus, Heracles was often depicted as the quintessential hero, not just for his physical prowess, but for his ability to persevere through unimaginable suffering. He was welcomed as a god by the Olympians, who recognized the extraordinary nature of his trials and the resilience that had led him to victory in every endeavor. Heracles' immortality was a reflection of the gods' recognition of his character. He was no longer the hero who faced trials on behalf of others. Now he stood as an immortal symbol of triumph over adversity, and his existence among the gods signified the end of his long and troubled journey. He was a figure of strength and honor who, after enduring endless hardship, had earned his place among the divine. Heracles' divine status also granted him a prominent role in future myths and stories. He was known to assist in various divine struggles, and was sometimes called upon by other gods in their conflicts, further cementing his role as a protector of both gods and mortals. In some versions of the myth, Heracles also aided the gods in their wars and battles, showcasing that even as a god, he was still committed to helping those in need. Heracles' immortality and eventual deification did not mark the end of his influence. His legacy lived on in various forms throughout the ancient world. Heracles was worshipped as a god, and his myth became an essential part of Greek culture. He was a symbol of heroic ideals, strength, courage, perseverance, and the ability to overcome any obstacle, no matter how great. Heracles' story became a blueprint for the perfect hero, someone who faced trials and tribulations, overcame them, and achieved greatness despite overwhelming odds. His feats were recounted in countless stories, and temples were built in his honor throughout the Greek world. Festivals were held in his name, and athletes often competed in events dedicated to his strength. Moreover, Heracles became a central figure in art, literature, and philosophy. Artists depicted his labors in intricate works of sculpture, and playwrights dramatized his struggles and triumphs on the stage. Philosophers, too, used his story as an example of moral fortitude and the potential for redemption. His life, though full of suffering, was ultimately one of transcendence, and it inspired generations to come. The death and subsequent apotheosis of Heracles marked the end of one of the most tragic and heroic lives in Greek mythology. His transition from mortal to god was not just a reward for his labors, but a reflection of his ability to endure and transcend his suffering. Heracles had faced incredible challenges, both from the gods and from his own flaws, but in the end, he was granted immortality as a final act of redemption for his incredible suffering and heroic deeds. Heracles' immortality symbolized the ultimate triumph of the human spirit, one that could endure and overcome even the greatest of trials. As a god, he became a symbol of strength, courage, and redemption, and his legacy continued to inspire the ancient world long after his death. Heracles' journey, filled with pain and suffering, ended not in defeat, but in his ascension to the heavens, where he would forever be remembered as one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. Heracles' 12 labors are undoubtedly among the most iconic feats in Greek mythology. These labors were not just a test of strength, but also a profound demonstration of endurance, perseverance, and moral character. From slaying the Nemean Lion to capturing Cerberus, the three-headed dog guarding the underworld, each labor pushed Heracles to his limits, requiring him to face monstrous beasts, cunning adversaries, and even the wrath of the gods. Despite the overwhelming odds, Heracles completed each task, not just because of his immense strength, but because of his relentless determination to succeed. His story is a testament to the hero's journey, a journey marked by trials, suffering, and the eventual triumph of the human spirit. Throughout the labors, Heracles encountered nearly insurmountable challenges, but he always found a way to prevail. Whether through wit, physical power, or sheer will, he proved that no obstacle was too great for a hero who refused to give up. His labors remain a symbol of the heroic ideal, someone who rises above adversity and achieves greatness through strength, courage, and resilience. Heracles' myth has endured for centuries and continues to captivate people worldwide. His story is not just about the completion of 12 impossible tasks, but about the complexity of being human, dealing with flaws, and achieving greatness despite immense struggles. He is more than just a hero of ancient myth. Heracles is a symbol of the human struggle to overcome adversity, the triumph over suffering, and the pursuit of redemption. His legacy has transcended time, becoming a part of modern culture and inspiring countless interpretations in art, literature, and film. The reason Heracles continues to capture the imagination of people is not just because of his strength, but because of the moral lessons his life imparts. His story resonates with the idea that anyone, no matter how flawed or seemingly ordinary, can become extraordinary through perseverance and determination. Heracles' legacy reminds us that the path to greatness is often paved with hardship, and that overcoming those challenges is what defines true heroism. The moral lessons embedded in Heracles' journey are timeless and universal. One of the most important themes is redemption. Heracles' quest for redemption was the driving force behind his 12 labors. His suffering, brought on by the wrath of the gods and his own mistakes, became the foundation of his heroic journey. Through his labors, he sought to prove his worth and cleanse himself of the burden of past sins. Ultimately, his life teaches us that redemption is possible, and that no matter how difficult the path, one can always strive to make things right. Heracles' story also highlights the importance of facing challenges head-on. The labors were not just tests of physical strength, they were trials of character. Each task forced Heracles to confront his own fears, flaws, and limitations. His story encourages us to confront the challenges in our own lives, no matter how daunting they may seem. It reminds us that avoiding difficulties often leads to stagnation, while facing them leads to growth. Lastly, the role of the gods in shaping human fate is a critical element of Heracles' myth. While Heracles fought against the gods' interference, it was ultimately his relationship with divine forces, his suffering at the hands of Hera, his redemption through Zeus that shaped his journey. The gods were not just external forces, but reflections of larger cosmic themes, reminding us of the delicate balance between fate and free will. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the incredible labors of Heracles. If you found this video interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next mythological adventure. We'd also love to hear from you. Comment below with your favorite part of Heracles' story and how you think his legacy influences us today. Whether it's in popular culture, philosophy, or the way we approach our own challenges, Heracles' myth is alive in many ways. We'll see you in the next video, where we explore more incredible myths and legendary figures from the past. Until then, stay strong, keep pushing forward, and remember the lessons of the labors. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.